Welcome in, everybody, to another week of XFL Weekly. And boy, do we have a game coming up this weekend. The championship game between the DC Defenders and the Arlington Renegades this weekend. But before we get into that, I am your host, Kyle Krajewski, joined by my beautiful, as always, co-host, Zach Cole. What's up, man?
What's going on, dude? I'm looking forward to this championship this weekend. Mother's Day, get to celebrate the moms, but a little bit of football in there too, and I'm fired up.
Yeah, we got Mother's Day weekend football, and that alone is a joyous pleasure to have. So we're not taking advantage, or taking too much advantage of it because we've got championship football this weekend.
Absolutely.
All right. So before we get into the preview, we're going to recap all the seasonal awards. Before we do that, we are XFL Weekly. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter at XFL_weekly. We are on YouTube at XFL Weekly. And if you're watching us on YouTube, find us on podcast platforms so you can just listen to us rather than watch us. Just search XFL Weekly and you should be able to find us.
We're
So,
great for
Zach,
road trips, right? Wouldn't you say, Kyle?
wow, I'd for sure say so. I listen to ourselves every day while driving to work.
Nothing soothes me more in the morning commute than your voice.
Wish I could say the same.
That's all right. I'll take it.
All right. Seasonal awards. They were announced a little bit last week, a little bit this week, kind of sprinkled out throughout the week. Every day they announced something different. And all throughout, it was a vote for play of the year. A little bit different than typical football award ceremonies. Instead of just kind of a night of announcements, it was spread out. First, we announced this last week on the show because that happened right before we recorded. Coach of the Year, DC Defenders head coach Reggie Barlow. After a fantastic 9-1 season, they're in the championship. I mean, Zach, I don't know your thoughts, but I don't think there was really any other choice here.
No, I don't think so either, especially with Barlow still in the running to get the biggest reward of all for a season, coming home with the championship title. I think he's coached a complete season front to back. We didn't see a slide from them at any point. This was a really, really well coached team through and through. And I think Barlow is really well deserving of the award.
Yeah, I mean, 9-1, you are the top team in the league, both on offense and for the majority of the season on defense. You ran a fantastic ship, and it well awarded. I would say, Coach of the Year is fantastic honor and well deserved.
Yeah, I think so. And I think when you look back at history and some of the teams, the NFL teams that come to mind, like that have been really, really good. When you think of the Panthers during their 15-1 season, I mean, Ron Rivera was the coach of the year that year. When you think of Belichick during some of his great seasons, the 16-0 season in 2007 comes to mind. He was coach of the year that year. So for Barlow to have a dominant year like this, I think he's only deserving.
Absolutely, and who knows? Maybe he gets a little couple eyes from the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this goes on to, not that the XFL isn't huge already, but maybe it goes on to something bigger. Either way, I think whatever the future holds for Barlow is well deserved. He's showed a lot of potential here as just being a great head coach.
Yeah, and even if it's not necessarily a head coaching gig, I think we've seen a lot of prowess on both sides of the ball from
Yeah,
from the defenders. So I don't think I wouldn't necessarily rule out an OC or a DC position for Barlow, or even if it's some sort of assistant position below
yeah,
that to work his way up, because we're not quite sure with the XFL just coming back into play where XFL coaching kind of mirrors to the NFL. You know what I mean? So I don't
yeah.
necessarily know if a head coaching gig is equivalent to an OC or a DC, and I don't necessarily know it's 1-to-1 either. But I definitely think this will kind of get some eyes on him, and he's done a great job with this audition.
Absolutely, absolutely. Next award that came about, Special Teams Player of the Year. I think different award. But I mean, I shout out to special teamers, and kind of one that is very welcome to see as special teamers just to be rewarded. This year, winner, taker homer of the special teams player of the year was wide receiver Darius Shepard of the St. Louis Battlehawks. I think he led the league in return yards and just dominated as a return man. And again, well deserved. I think uh, I couldn't think of anybody else, to be honest, to have received that award other than I think it was Mac Brown, punter of the Guardians, for having two launch passes.
Yeah, I think he and his name is escaping me at the moment, but the kicker
Oh
who
yes. Oh, I
was
know exactly who
seemingly
you're thinking of.
making field goals week in and week out.
I think
I
he's
apologize.
Renegades. Tyler Russolino.
That's it. Yeah. I mean,
Taylor
he would
Russolino.
be the only other guy that I would think would be in consideration along with Mac Brown, like you talked about there, Kyle. But I mean, Shepard was definitely deserving of this award. You mentioned he led the league in return yards. He was second in return yards average on his returns. He had a couple of really, really explosive returns. And I don't necessarily think it plays into effect, but he was also a really solid receiver for the Battlehawks as well. So,
Yeah.
just a really well-rounded player. We saw a lot of good things from him this year, and I think a deserving choice for this award.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I mean, you said it. He was fantastic on offense as well as return man. So shout
Just
out Darius Shepard.
the sort of guy what you just want the ball to be in his hands, and I think that
Yeah.
that's the um, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is. That's the premise of this award for Special Team of the Year.
Yeah, absolutely. Defensive player of the year was also announced. Went to Vegas Viper linebacker Pita Tomapenu. I mean, led the league in forced fumbles with four, second in the XFL in sacks, and he even had a 3-sack game. I think fantastic player, fantastic defensive player. I think there were a number of players who I were up for this award, and quite honestly, Pita, fantastic season. Just dominated for the Vipers altogether. He was a majority of their defense, and I well deserved. I think he was throughout the season a guy that just stayed atop the rankings or the stat sheet
Yeah.
in fumbles, sacks, tackles for losses, and well deserved.
Yeah, and I think one thing I just want to mention is that when we talk about almost every single team in the XFL, there's a guy that we always mention, and when you think of the defenders, it's Teamu and Abram Smith, or when you think of
Yeah,
the Sea Dragons, it's Josh Gordon or Jacor Pearson and
Danucci.
yeah, Danucci, yeah, and I think Toma Penu was that guy for the Vipers. He was really just stellar all year long. And I think it was kind of understated being that he was on a team that wasn't necessarily super successful this season. But I think he single handedly kind of kept his team in a lot of games, like you mentioned, with a lot of those sacks and forced fumbles that he had this season. Watching his highlight film that they put up for his award thing was just ridiculous. I mean, he was all over the place this year.
Yeah, he was. I mean, watching the games alone, on top of the highlight reel, he was a standout for sure for Vegas as a team overall, and definitely a guy well deserving of recognition, especially to this degree.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely.
And the final award that they announced, Offensive Player of the Year, uh, quarterback for the DC Defenders, Jordan Ta'amu. And I'm looking at the stat sheet right now. He wound up finishing the season second in passing yards. He had 14 pass touchdowns, and he was seventh in rushing yards with 3 rushing touchdowns. This was a guy who started the season mainly running the ball. I think DC as a whole was a rushing team, and like halfway through the season, flipped the switch, and next thing you knew, Tamu was leading weeks as the leading receiver or leading thrower throughout the week, and just to see him dominate kind of both sides, both rushing and passing, and just be successful in both, I think is truly what led to him being Offensive Player of the Year.
Yeah, and I think this comes down to when you look at the award as a whole, it's not just a guy that's wowing in the stat sheet. It's not just a guy that's game managing his way to a bunch of wins. It's a guy that's combining both of those and kind of meeting in the middle. And I think that brings you to Teamu. I think if you would have gone the stat route, I think Ben DiNucci might have been the pick. I think if you would have gone the game manager route, AJ McCarron might have been the pick. But the perfect meeting point of the two of them is kind of Jordan Teamu. And I mean, leading your team to 9-1 is just phenomenal. And I think that also helps kind of push him to this OPOY selection. I have no qualms with it at all.
Yeah, not at all. Especially when you laid it out that way, where it's the combination of game manager and stats, where the best offensive player in the league may not be the most statistical highest athlete in the league, and it may not be the one with the best record. This one just kind of happened to be. I mean, he had the best record, but was on top of just game managing and being able to perform where he needed to. Launching an 80-yard bomb to Lucky Jackson just definitely helps, and it was a great season from Ta'amu. And for me as a blessed Defenders fan, it was nice to see.
Now, Kyle, let me ask you real quick. Sorry, I was just sneezing there. Give me a sec. Let me ask you if we had to pivot this to an MVP vote, and the question always comes into play with the NFL MVP: is it the best player? Is it the player that's the most meaningful to their team? If we take that into consideration, let's say what player was most meaningful to their team, as well as had the best stats and that whole sort of gist too. Because you could argue a center for any given team is the most
For sure.
important player, but we're looking for a guy that's a combination of the stats and a combination of being the most vital to his team. What guy would come to your mind?
Oh, I mean, it's Ta'amu. Kind of when you lay it out. A few other. Just gonna name two other guys. Ben DiNucci. I think without DiNucci and
Yeah.
his just passing and ball launching ability, I don't think the Sea Dragons would have been as competitive as they were. So that alone, I mean, they had uh, two guys in the top six in receiving yards, and up until like week 8, I think Josh Gordon, Jacquor Pearson were 1 and 2 in receiving yards. Uh, I mean, you don't have that much success in the passing game without. I think Ben DiNucci was a huge factor in that,
Yeah.
uh, and just somebody else, Abram Smith.
Yeah.
I mean, just dominating the league in rushing yards. He had over 300 yards more than the next guy up, and 7 touchdowns, leading the league in rushing touchdowns, tied with Davion Smith.
Yeah.
I think he was just a huge factor on the ground for DC, and I mean, he had the one game where he had like 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. Like that game alone just kind of really set a bar for him. Like he is this offense for this game at least, and that kind of set a level throughout the season where he was a huge factor in that offense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you hit the nail on the head. Abram Smith was going to be my choice. I think
Yeah,
those 7 touchdowns and more than 300 yards over the next closest guy is just that to me
just
that just
dominant.
screams, yeah, like this guy is super important. And I don't know, maybe that the threat of Teamu throwing the ball kind of opened some things up for him. Maybe this team is just super dominant and he's deserving of that. But either way, and another guy, I just kind of want to throw his name out there, and it's kind of like a what could have been situation is Jontre Kirkland. I mean,
Yeah.
we saw the Roughnecks were a completely different team after he was taken out of the equation. And maybe I'm kind of thinking in NFL terms here, where we see the MVP typically go to a quarterback and the OPOY go to maybe that flashy
Mhm.
guy, that Christian McCaffrey, that Justin Jefferson type guy, Cooper Cup type guy, and maybe that's kind of what I'm going for here. But Jontre Kirkland was vital to Houston's offensive attack, and once they lost him for the season, we saw them lose their identity completely. I mean, there's some guys there, Cedric Bird, Deontay Burnett, a couple of guys that were trying to kind of fill in the gaps, but the offense was just not the same without Jontre Kirkland. So I think his name should also just kind of be brought up in this situation. Kind of what could have been, maybe maybe who knows, he would have ended up at the top of the stat charts here with a great season, or maybe he
Yeah,
just would have fizzled out. But he was off to an awesome start, ended up with 4 touchdowns on the season with only, I want to say, 4 or 5 games
I think
played.
it was
So
four games, 4 touchdowns,
yeah,
and I mean
on that
that's
pace,
incredible.
he would have led the XFL. Hakeem Butler was in first with 8. So what could have been, what could have been.
What could have been? Oh man, I miss John Trey.
Me too, me too.
Hoping for a speedy recovery. All right, and then yeah, I mean they announced all these awards, but there was a YouTube vote for Play of the Year. And Zach, I don't know if you saw it. It was the St. Louis Battlehawks or fake punt that basically like sparked the it was like that sparked the comeback for the game versus the Vipers. Huge play, huge like game shifting play. If it were up to me, it'd be DC Defenders fans throwing lemons onto the field. Just that being the play. But the fake punt for the touchdown with 5 minutes left to just basically turn the tide and shift it into a game winning momentum shift. Just huge play and congratulations to the play for being play of the year.
Yeah, it's kind of cool because I know we're in an age of participation trophies, blah blah blah, but it's kind of cool to see guys, a whole unit kind of recognized on the season for a play of the year, which is kind of special. And I think in a 10 game 8 team league, you can do that. You can narrow it down to one play. I don't think we would ever see something like this in the NFL because so many plays happen week in and week out. But this was a great choice. I mean, other plays that come to my mind, you mentioned the lemons on the field. I think with some of the Lawan Winningham catches we saw this year,
Oh my
um,
gosh.
Cody Latimer vertical down the middle. I mean, there's just a lot of really amazing plays that come to mind. But like you said, I think the situation that sparked the comeback, the 80 yards, the special teams trick play, all of that combined, I think this was the right choice.
Yeah. So congratulations to XFL award winners. Fantastic season.
Yep, absolutely.
And now, that being said, it's championship weekend. We've got the XFL championship game this weekend. The game of all games for the XFL. I mean, we've got the DC Defenders versus the Arlington Renegades. DC wrapped up the season with a record of 9-1, facing up against the 4-6 Arlington Renegades. That everybody was like, "Hold on, why are they making the playoffs and not the 7-3 team over here?" But Arlington showed up last week, just completely dominating Houston, 26-11, just to claim the spot. So I don't know. Part of that just kind of tells me maybe they earned it. Maybe they really deserve to be in the spot, and obviously they do because they're in it.
Yeah, I think the theme throughout the season that really kind of held true for the Renegades was their defense. I mean,
Yeah,
all season long, we've talked about their defense, and their offense was never able to put up the points to match their defense, but we've seen that start happening. And I don't think it's an overstatement to say that Arlington's had a championship level defense all season long. I mean, limiting teams to 12, 14, 16 points a game that's what you look for in the game of football, and you just hope that your offense can back you up. And unfortunately, throughout the season, they were letting themselves down a little bit with the offense there, only putting up 10, 8, 12 points a game. Not enough points to win a football game, even when your defense has a stellar week. But as of late, we've seen that change and we've seen that turn around. So I definitely think that the Renegades do have a horse in this race, to win the championship. I don't think, despite the records 9-1 and 4-6, I don't think that this is as blatantly obvious as it might seem. But I mean, Kyle, what do you think?
yeah. I mean, I think the game to point out that really emphasizes how close this can and potentially will be is just week 9. We saw these two teams face against each other, and it went into overtime. I think that alone just kind of shows where the Renegades were later in the season, especially now with Luis Perez kind of taking over as quarterback.
Right.
He's kind of really found his rhythm in this offense, and to have that game finish 28-26 in overtime between I think they were still 4-6 to 7-1, or basically the records were similar, and we're gonna potentially see those similar teams with maybe even a better Renegades team coming out there. And it's gonna be closer than what these records kind of indicate.
Definitely. And Kyle, as I go back through the results and look at all 10 games for the Renegades this season, I think their magic number in this game is going to be about 18 points. If they want a shot to win this game, they're going to need to score at least 18 points. All of their wins this season, they scored 18 or more points, with the exception of, I don't know, let me see,
At
week
the
5.
Brahmas game.
Yeah, when they played the Brahmas in the Defense Bowl, that was 12-10. I don't think either of those offenses particularly wanted to score. And if I remember correctly, I feel like we had a defensive touchdown in that game too that that
Yep.
pushed that.
Yep.
So I mean, 18 really feels like the magic number, and of course, it's going to come down to their defense if their defense can hold. But I think if they want a chance to win this game, their offense is going to need to be able to put up about 18 points to win.
Yeah, and I mean, we
18
mentioned
plus, of course. Sorry.
yes, of course, of course. But we mentioned them before, but their kicker, Taylor Russolino, I shout out Taylor Russolino. I think I'm looking at last week's game. He had 2 field goals, but he's just kind of been a field goal machine. So like even if they just go and rely on him and he kicks 6 field goals, brings them to the magic 18, which for some reason would not surprise me for this Arlington offense. Just kind of floating there to the 20-yard line and being like, can't do this. Or like DC, that defense is pretty good at stopping players
Yeah.
where they need to. But no, like their offense, and they showed it last week with 26 points against the Roughnecks. They can now score points. I don't know. It's tricky. It's also tricky because they beat the Roughnecks 26-11 2 weeks ago or last week. And then just the week before they lost 25-9. So this is a Renegades team that ebbs and flows week in and week out.
Yeah, that's the tale of this team here is if it depends what team shows up. If it's the Renegades that are content with putting up 9 points in a game, 11 points in a game, 12 points in a game, there's no shot. There's no shot because the defenders are not going to be slowed down that drastically to put up less than 10 and have us have a 12-10 game here. So they need to be able to score some points. And Kyle, you mentioned with Russolini, we need to keep some kicker stats next year. We got to be on top of this by the time we get here.
Yeah, we should have put more emphasis and thought into these kickers. They are the lifeblood of any football team.
Who knows? Maybe they'll give us a vote in the special team of the year next year if we start considering them a little bit more.
Oh, if we get okay, we're gonna push to have just a special team player of the year vote. It's the only envelope we have to ever send to the XFL.
We don't want anything with the offensive player, defense, no coach, nope, just special team.
We just want a singular vote. Zach and I have to arm wrestle for who it's going to go to.
That would be good. I would be very happy with that.
But yeah, DC, I mean, that's an offense that's going to be really tricky to slow down. I think the lowest they've scored all season, 18, magic number of 18.
That's the magic number.
But that was week 2. Ever since, I mean, going from week 10 backwards, they've scored 29, 28, 34, 37, or 36. They're scoring. And I don't think the Renegades are really going to stop them. They didn't in week 9. I think it's really just going to come down to the Arlington offense just trying to keep up with them. And they can. They have shown in week 9 that this offense can score, that Luis Perez can put this offense together and ball out, that Davion Smith can rush the ball and score. I think we're going to see two of the best running backs in the XFL face off against each other in Davion Smith and Abram Smith.
Yeah.
And who knows, maybe both of them come away with 2 touchdowns, or this is just going to be an air attack game. Either way, I think we're going to see, I really hope we see offensive renegades rather than pure defensive renegades.
Yeah, I think everyone's hoping for that. And I think I don't know how much necessarily needs to be said about the defenders because they've pretty much proved what they are all season
Yeah.
long. We haven't seen that choke game from them, that terrible game from them.
Yeah,
Even in a game, go
even the
ahead.
game that they lost, yeah, they lost by 1
Right.
in a stunner, and uh, they don't, they haven't gotten blown out because they have the 1 loss, a 1-point loss. But you're right, it's a team that is going to be very difficult to keep down.
Exactly. And as we get into the spread, I think Vegas is expecting the same thing. This is Vegas sports betting, not the Vegas Vipers. But I think Vegas is
Who
expecting
knows?
the
Maybe
same
they
thing.
have similar brains.
Well, if they've learned anything from the NFL, it's not to bet on your own sport. So take notes, XFL, especially you, Vegas. But with DC, not to get too far away from the point, DC is going to do what DC does, and they're going to throw the ball. Teamu is going to be the best player on the field at any given moment. Abram Smith is going to pound the ball down your throat, and when they get down into the goal line situations, red zone situations, we're expecting to see Teamu run the ball, De'Aaron King run the ball, Abram Smith run the ball. Any way they can find to get the ball in the end zone, they're going to take advantage of. And that's not to understate the fact either that they have Lucky Jackson, who's able to just completely blow the game open at any point with his receiving ability. They have Chris Blair, who's also a huge receiver for them, who has even more yards than Lucky Jackson and less receptions. I mean, they are just explosive across the board on offense, and their defense is solid too. I think for the Renegades, the glimmer of hope that they have is that teams do tend to put up some points on them. I think their defense has weakened a little bit as the season has gone on, especially after that week 7 game that we mentioned, Kyle, where they lost by a point to the Guardians. The Guardians being 37-36. But, I mean, we've seen them give up 28 points to the Brahmas, who are not an offensive team. We saw them give up 26 to the Renegades once before, week 9, who, again, are not an offensive team. We saw them give up 33 points to the Sea Dragons. I mean, there's a world where they are going to be vulnerable in this game, and
Yep.
Arlington is gonna stay in it and is gonna compete. But I think the key to the game comes down to, will Arlington's offense show up to play? Because if they do, I think they can put up points and it's a game. But if they don't show up, it's going to be a long night, I think.
Yeah, and I think that they are going to show up. I think this defense does something. I don't see. I mean, I'm looking at just the defender schedule, and their second game with against teams has been a little bit more game managed. I mean, aside from the loss, and I don't know, the defenders' defense is tricky. The defense in DC of the defenders, man, I love saying that. Uh, but they're all over the place. I don't know. I say that they could show up, but who knows?
And Kyle, I truly thought like their defense was a little more outstanding than it was. Now that I'm going back and kind of taking a deep dive into it, in weeks 1, 2, 3, 4, like we saw them give up. They gave up 18 points to Seattle in week 1. They gave up 6 points to Vegas in week 2. Then they had a little bit of a breakdown. They gave up 28 to St. Louis. Now, mind you, these are all wins, so it doesn't really matter. But then they went back to their ways and only gave up 18 to Vegas. And then it started kind of going downhill. 20 to Seattle. I'm sorry, 20 to St. Louis, and then 26 to Houston. And then I mentioned that game that they dropped to Orlando, they gave up 37 points. And that was kind of like the beginning of this defensive slide a little bit. Then 33 to the Sea Dragons, then 26 to the Renegades, then, and to end it all up, 28 to the Brahmas. So, like, I don't really know what to expect. Like I said, as we're doing a little bit more of a deep dive, I'm like almost talking myself into the Renegades hanging around in this game a little bit more. So I don't know. I think this is a very interesting game once you start doing a little more of a deep dive into it.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of it being the championship, where these are two teams with defenses that can stop the opposing offense, but can also just let them score. And two offenses, very drastically different offenses, where DC is going to
Yeah,
score no matter what, but Arlington is a question mark any given week.
right. Yeah, I think I'm tossing and turning in my head at this point on what to think about this game. I came in here with a game plan, but I'm starting to talk myself out of it a little bit. The more and more we're looking at this, so I don't know. Maybe we should just get into our
I
spreads. I can rip the Band-Aid off and go with my gut here, I guess.
I was just gonna say let's. I'm gonna make you not think on it anymore. We're gonna get into these picks. So I didn't even announce when this game was.
Yeah, I screwed up at the beginning. I expected the big game to be on Sunday, but it's actually on Saturday, which I
Oh
kind of
yeah,
like a little bit more. I've always had a major gripe with the NFL for having it be Super Bowl Sunday and not having the Monday afterwards be a national holiday or something.
yeah.
But
And instead, we have a national holiday the day after the XFL championship. We just all get to love our mothers, give them a
the
good hug and
XFL
kiss.
really is the testing ground for the NFL. Like, look, this is what it should be like. Look, this is how it's done.
Put have the Super Bowl the day before Father's Day. I dare you.
Did I hear NFL in June? I like it. I'm on board.
I'm listening. All right. Game is Saturday, 8 p.m. on ABC. Championship game. Arlington Renegades versus the DC Defenders in San Antonio at the Alamo Dome. Zach, let's make these picks.
Let's do it.
Spread is set -6.5 in favor of the DC Defenders.
I am going to go ahead and take the DC Defenders -6.5 in this game. I would love nothing more than for Arlington to hang around and be in this game and make it a game, and who knows, even steal the game. But I truly think that DC is going to come out and is just going to play dominant football from the beginning to the end of this game. Um, as I was kind of talking about their defensive slide a little bit, it also kind of dawned on me it's a long season. 10 weeks is a long time to keep up to keep up a really strong front and a really good um, just a really assertive performance throughout the season. And I think we saw last week them holding Seattle to 21 points, a potent offense, a super potent offense, is a good sign. And I think against an offense that's not as potent in Arlington, I think that they're going to hold them to even less points than that. And I think they're on DC is on par to put up somewhere in the 30s. So I think -6.5 is a pretty safe bet for me.
Zach, welcome.
I knew the hat was coming out eventually.
I had it here this whole time. It was coming eventually. I'm joining you. DC -6.5. I think the game we saw from DC last week, a dominant 37-21 in a North Division championship game against an opponent who I think is better than the Renegades. And truthfully, I mean, you see the score 21-37, but in the end, I mean, Seattle scored that final touchdown with 12 seconds left. So realistically, it was a 15-37 victory. I mean, that is as commanding as it gets against what I think, and we could probably both agree, is a better team than the Renegades are. That's Seattle.
Agreed. Yeah.
So I think DC comes in here a week of rest, just ready to kind of continue their dominant ways that we've seen from them all season.
Yep.
And I'm with you. DC -6.5.
Let's ride on that. I love that. As for the over under, which is currently set at 48
And
points,
even 48.
That's tricky because as we talk about it, like I can picture 38 in my head. I don't 33 to like 15 is sticking out in my brain. Arlington not hitting that magic 18, and the defenders flexing their muscles and
Magic
holding the
18.
team, holding the team below that 20-point margin, which is just kind of commonplace for them. I don't know. 48 does feel a little bit high to me. I'm going to go ahead and say under. I'm going to go under 48. I don't necessarily love it, but I could also see a world where the defenders kind of have the Renegades at bay in this game. Like you mentioned, Kyle, how the Sea Dragons were last week, maybe down a score and are just kind of running the ball and kind of moving that clock along and not necessarily in any urgency to put up points. I know that's not exactly the way you want to play in a championship game, but I think if it's not necessarily super competitive, if it's not back and forth exchanging scores, I could see a game where DC comes out and just kind of mutes Arlington with their run game and just kind of runs that clock and plays possession football. So I'm going to take the under. Long story short, I'm going to take the under.
I am going to differ here. I'm going to take the over. And I think a majority of that has to do with DC just scoring. I think this offense is going to want to put on a show in the championship and just put up points. And I think to win by 6.5, you kind of have to put up quite a bit of points.
Yeah.
And Arlington, I feel like they may be a team where second half just snaps into them, where they're just like, oh, this is championship. Let's get in. Let's do this. We had that week off. We kind of we're running a little bit. We've got our breath back.
Yeah.
Let's score some. And I feel like it's hard for me to imagine a game where the Renegades come off of a 26-point game 2 weeks ago and then just drop down to 5. Not in the playoffs. So I feel like Luis Perez has another solid game, but I'm picturing like you said, like a 20 to a 35 point. I'm oddly imagining the same outcome as the last week's Defenders Sea Dragons game, where it's like mid 30s to low 20s.
And that'll do it. That'll push you up in the 50s, and that'll get you over that. And I think, Kyle, we keep saying it over and over and over. This game is going to come down to Arlington's offense, what they want to do. If they're going to roll over and not put up points, the under is going to hit. If they're going to be competitive in this game, the over is going to hit. I think that's just a pretty simple, oversimplified way of explaining this over underline.
Yeah, oh man, I hope Arlington shows up. I hope that offense puts on a show because they've got magic that they can put together when they can. It's just about doing so.
Agreed. Yep, agreed.
So hopefully, and I think we will. I think we'll have a fantastic game. I think it'll be a good one, no matter the outcome. Although we all know I'm rooting for a certain specific team.
Yeah, here's the hoping,
No
and
hints.
I think what's that?
No hints.
No hints. I think that's what XFL fans across the board are hoping for, and I think even fans of both of these teams. Obviously, Kyle, you and the Defenders faithful would love to see them end up with the championship, and obviously Arlington would love to end up with the championship. But I think on both sides for this inaugural XFL season, if a good championship game is played, I think again, not to oversimplify, but everyone's going to be happy. Of course, you want to come home with that championship, but I think nothing would be better for the brand of the XFL and for the legitimacy of the XFL and showing that this is a good football league, not just some gimmicky one-off. A good game would be great for the XFL.
Yeah, broadcast on ABC Saturday night.
National television. Yep.
The Rock is going to be there. He'll probably be running with the teams. I think this is the stage for the XFL to be like, this is our product.
Yep.
Let's do it, boys.
Absolutely.
And I believe it'll be a good game for that reason alone. Because we're seeing an XFL championship game.
Here's to hoping. Here's to hoping.
Here's to hoping. All right. With that being said, It was a lovely week chatting with you, Zach.
Always, man.
Championship weekend. We're gonna see a good one. I know that for a fact, and I'm excited to sit down Saturday night, watch some championship football. In mid May.
Yeah,
What a thought! What a
that's good
lovely
stuff.
thought. All right, Zach, and everybody tuning in, thank you so much. It was a pleasure, and we'll chat next week. We'll chat about the winner, or just wrap up the season. And
Yeah,
Zach, I'll see you next week.
sounds like a plan, brother.
See you.